The good thing about a failing planetary shield wall was that it failed slowly. Like a bad marriage, you had plenty of warning before the inevitable collapse. Captain Draylen stood on the bridge of her ship, the Resilient, watching the rogue planet's shield wall flicker like a dodgy neon sign in a second-rate bar. "Well, that looks promising," she muttered, leaning back in her chair, which squeaked in protest. It had been making that sound for weeks, but like everything else on the Resilient, it was on the later list. Her first officer, Lorne, didn't even look up from his console. "Imagine the insurance premiums on that," he said. Lorne had a voice like gravel scraping over more gravel, the result of years of shouting over malfunctioning engines. "Insurance premiums. Try getting someone to insure a rogue planet," Draylen replied. "They'd laugh you out of the galaxy." The bridge was a clutter of mismatched chairs, flickering screens, and the pervasive smell of burnt coffee. The Resilient was technically a merchant ship, but in reality it was a barely held-together hunk of metal that carried more duct tape than cargo. Somehow, though, it kept on flying, much like its captain. "Incoming message from the Kyler delegation," chimed in Rilla, the communications officer who had the unfortunate habit of being cheerful no matter how bleak the situation. "They're waiting to dock." "Ah, the Kyler conglomerate," Draylen said with a wry grin. "The galaxy's answer to what if accountants had tentacles. They've come a long way for a trade deal," Lorne pointed out. "Hope they like disappointment." "It's the only thing we stock in abundance." Draylen stood up, stretching her arms over her head. "Let's go meet our guests. Hope they've got a good sense of humor." Lorne snorted. "If they don't, they'll learn fast." They made their way to the docking bay, a cavernous space that always smelled faintly of engine oil and regret. The airlock hissed open with the kind of dramatic flair that only malfunctioning machinery could achieve, revealing the Kyler delegation. The Kyler were a species that seemed to have evolved by committee. They had too many limbs, not enough symmetry, and their skin had the unsettling texture of a corporate tax form. The lead Kyler, presumably the head accountant, was gesturing enthusiastically with something that might have been an arm or might have been an antenna. "Welcome to the Resilient," Draylen said, trying to sound like a professional. "I hope the trip wasn't too bumpy." The head Kyler, who identified himself as Zilks, made a noise like a calculator having a nervous breakdown. "We are here to discuss trade." "Great," Draylen replied, ignoring the fact that Zilks's words were translated through a device that made everything sound slightly sarcastic. "Just what resources are you interested in?" Zilks waved his appendage thing. "We require your planet's primary export." Draylen exchanged a glance with Lorne. "Bad news for you, we're fresh out of despair and cynicism." The Kyler did not laugh. "Our analysts have identified your species' most valuable asset as human ingenuity." Lorne raised an eyebrow. "That's a bit vague, isn't it? We might have some bottled optimism in the back." Zilks's appendages twitched. "We wish to acquire ingenuity in raw form." "Raw form?" Draylen echoed. "What do you think it is, some kind of mineral? We have secured ample trade resources." "Please convey us this ingenuity," Zilks insisted. Draylen, not for the first time, wished she could turn sarcasm into a weapon. "Well, you've come to the right place. The Resilient is practically dripping with raw ingenuity. You might want to watch your step." Zilks emitted an approving noise, oblivious to the mockery. "Excellent," he said, or rather, his translator said with an irritatingly cheerful tone. Draylen led them through the ship, pointing out various historical artifacts that were really just broken parts they hadn't bothered to throw away. The Kyler made appreciative gurgles, their data pads flickering with alien writing. In the mess hall, which doubled as a storage area and occasionally a third-rate nightclub, they laid out a spread of dried protein blocks, which the Kyler examined with intense interest. "Our gift to you," Draylen said, "a taste of human culinary ingenuity." The Kyler sampled the blocks. Their reaction was a series of hoots and clicks that translated as exquisite. "Must have hit their taste buds where it counts," Lorne muttered, nudging Draylen. Zilks gestured for attention. "We wish to finalize acquisition of ingenuity." Draylen nodded sagely. "Of course. Right this way." She led them to the engine room, the beating heart of the Resilient. It was a chaotic mess of cables, pipes, and grease-stained notes that outlined various improvements. Zilk scanned the room, appendages twitching. "This is the source." Draylen spread her arms wide. "Every ounce of human ingenuity you could ever want. It's what keeps us flying." Zilk's vibrated with excitement. "We shall begin collection immediately." Draylen exchanged a look with Lorne, who shrugged. "How exactly do you plan on collecting ingenuity?" "We have devices," Zilk said, gesturing to a group of smaller Kyler bringing in what looked like vacuum cleaners designed by someone who had never seen one. "Ah," said Draylen. The All-Suckatapensi approach. The Kyler set to work, and Draylen and her crew watched with bemused interest as the aliens carefully vacuumed the engine room, occasionally examining the contents of their devices with satisfaction. As the Kyler diligently worked, Draylen leaned over to Lorne. "You think they know they're just collecting dust and engine grease?" Lorne shrugged. "Better not tell them. They might try to return it." After an hour of this surreal activity, Zilks approached them, appendages waving in delight. "We have collected sufficient ingenuity." "Fantastic," Draylen said, trying to keep a straight face. "Pleasure doing business with ya." As the Kyler delegation filed out, Draylen felt a mix of relief and disbelief. "They actually bought it," she said to Lorne. "Guess they never heard the saying, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit," Lorne replied. Draylen chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, we've got a story to tell next time we're at port." But as the last Kyler left, the ship shuddered, the lights flickered, and the hum of the engines faltered. "What the hell?" Draylen said, racing to the control panel. Lorne was already there, his fingers flying over the buttons. "Looks like they've messed with our systems. Damn it, they might have actually taken something important." Draylen cursed, slamming her fist into the console. "Thought we were conning them, but they might have just pulled one over us." Rilla's voice came over the comms, unusually tense. "Captain, we've got a problem. The planetary shield wall is collapsing faster than expected." Draylen stared at the flickering screen. Perfect timing. Just when things were looking up, she turned to Lorne. "Get us moving now. We need to get off this rock before we're toast." "Working on it," Lorne muttered, hands a blur on the controls. The ship lurched, the engine's rhythm shaky. They were moving, but barely. "Come on, Resilient, don't give up on us now," Draylen urged. As the ship struggled to lift off, the shield wall's failure became more apparent. The sky outside was an ominous swirl of colors, a cosmic reminder that nature didn't give a damn about trade agreements or human ingenuity. They broke free from the planet's atmosphere, barely ahead of the collapsing shield. Draylen let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Well," she said, slumping back in her chair. "That was an adventure." Lorne nodded, still focused on the controls. "Next time, let's just trade them some motivational posters and call it a day." Draylen chuckled dryly. "Yeah, hang in there might be all the ingenuity they need." As they floated in the safety of space, the Resilient humming with a reassuringly familiar rattle, Draylen looked back at the rogue planet, now a swirling mess of colors and collapsing shields. She couldn't help but smile. "Well, at least we got a good story out of it," she said. "And a reminder, never underestimate the power of human stupidity," Lorne snorted. "Or alien gullibility." Draylen watched the planet slowly fade from view, replaced by the familiar vastness of space. "Let's get out of here," she said, a grin tugging at her lips. "Before someone decides they want a refund." With a final hum of protest, the Resilient shot forward into the void, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. The Kyler delegation had barely left the Resilient when Draylen's comms unit beeped with a message from Earth. She grimaced, expecting bad news to follow the cosmic comedy of errors. After all, why waste a perfectly good disaster? "Captain Draylen." The voice on the other end was as smooth as a politician's handshake and twice as oily. "This is Administrator Bartle from Earth Supply Chain Authority." "Administrator," Draylen replied, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that could rot teeth. "What can I do for the guy who's probably about to ruin my day?" Bartle cleared his throat, ignoring the jab like a pro. We've received reports about the shield wall failure on the rogue planet. It's critical we resolve this quickly. The planet's collapse could disrupt Earth's entire supply chain. Ah, the universal constant, more problems, Draylen said, rolling her eyes. What's the plan, or do we just panic and hope it fixes itself? Bartle managed a frustrated sigh. We need you to coordinate with the Kyler. Their technology might help stabilize the shield wall, or at least delay its collapse until we can get a proper team in place. Of course, leave it to us to unscrew the universe, Draylen replied. Consider it done after I figure out how to tell the Kyler we sold them hot air. She ended the call, turning to Lorne with an exaggerated groan. Guess we're not done with our tentacled friends. We need to convince them to help with the shield wall. Lorne looked up from the control panel, where he'd been coaxing the ship into something resembling functionality. How exactly do we explain that their precious ingenuity might have been our engine room's dust bunnies? Carefully, Draylen said with a wry grin. Or creatively. I'm not picky. Rilla, ever the optimist, chimed in over the intercom. Look on the bright side, Captain. Maybe the Kyler will appreciate our unique interpretation of trade. Draylen chuckled. Rilla, if optimism were fuel, we'd have enough to warp to the edge of the universe. With a heavy sigh, she instructed Rilla to patch through a call to the Kyler. The screen flickered, and Zaire Lowe, the head of the Kyler delegation's economic analysis team, appeared. His expression was somewhere between intrigued and confused, a common look for those dealing with human logic. Captain Draylen, Zaire Lowe said in a voice that sounded like a fax machine having an existential crisis. We were pleased with the transaction, but we have detected anomalies in our collected ingenuity. Draylen smiled innocently. Anomalies? That's just bonus features. But listen, we have a bit of a situation with the shield wall down here. Zaire Lowe blinked, or did the Kyler equivalent, which involved half his appendages twitching. A situation. Yeah, the kind where things explode if you don't act fast, she said. We need some of that advanced Kyler tech to help stabilize the shield. Zaire Lowe hesitated, clearly running the request through whatever bureaucratic filter the Kyler used. Our technology is not typically shared without extensive negotiations. Think of it as a chance to study human problem-solving under pressure, Draylen suggested. Besides, if the planet goes, so does your newly acquired ingenuity. The Kyler economists' appendages fluttered in what might have been considered a shrug. Very well, we will dispatch a team to assist. However, this will require further analysis and possibly renegotiation. Draylen nodded, hiding her relief behind a mask of casual indifference. Of course, we'll discuss terms over a nice glass of disappointment later. As the call ended, Lorne grunted from his seat. Think they'll actually help, or are we just buying time? Either way, we're knee-deep in it, and I left my boots at home, Draylen sighed. Let's get ready for some unplanned engineering. With the Kyler team en route, Draylen turned her attention back to the bridge. The Resilient was a symphony of rattles and clanks, a testament to human ingenuity, or stubbornness, depending on the perspective. As the Kyler ship approached, it became clear that their definition of assistance involved more gadgets than a paranoid conspiracy theorist's basement. The Kyler team, equipped with devices that looked suspiciously like overgrown abacuses, began analyzing the shield wall's decay with the precision of an obsessive-compulsive accountant. Draylen watched the Kyler work, her expression a mix of curiosity and the kind of skepticism reserved for late-night infomercials. They're either going to save us or turn this into the universe's most expensive fireworks display. Lorne leaned against the console, arms crossed. Either way, it's a show. The Kyler team, led by a particularly enthusiastic alien named Rinmill, gestured towards the flickering shield data displayed on the screen. We have determined the weak points in the shield matrix. Brilliant, Draylen said, throwing Lorne a look. And how do we fix it without blowing up the planet? Rinmill's response came through the translator with a tone that suggested exhaustive patience. We will reinforce the matrix using harmonized energy pulses directed by our ship. Draylen nodded, hiding her ignorance behind a nonchalant shrug. "Sounds good. Just let us know if you need anything." As the Kyler team set to work, the Resilient hummed with a mixture of anticipation and barely contained chaos. Draylen watched the shield data, fingers drumming a steady rhythm on the console. "Think they'll pull it off?" Rilla asked, her voice deceptively chipper. "We'll find out soon enough," Draylen replied, eyes fixed on the screen. "If not, we'll have a front row seat to one hell of a cosmic implosion." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness, each second stretching like the universe itself. Finally, Rinmill signaled that they were ready. "We will initiate the pulse now," Rinmill announced. "Prepare for possible fluctuations." "Great," Draylen said dryly. "Fluctuations. Love those." With a synchronized gesture, the Kyler activated their devices. The atmosphere crackled with energy, and the shield data danced erratically as the pulses collided with the failing matrix. "Hold on to something," Lorne muttered, gripping the console as the ship shuddered. Draylen steadied herself, eyes locked on the screen as the Kyler technology worked its alien magic. Slowly, agonizingly, the data began to stabilize. The shield wall, once a patchwork of chaos, started to resemble something approaching stability. The bridge erupted into cheers, a sound that felt foreign but welcome in the haphazard environment of the Resilient. "Looks like they did it," Rilla said, the relief evident in her voice. Draylen allowed herself a small smile. "Well, I'll be damned. They actually might have saved us from a cosmic barbecue." As the Kyler team concluded their work, Zyrlo reappeared on the comms. "The immediate danger has been mitigated. However, this solution is temporary. The shield wall will require ongoing maintenance." Draylen nodded. "Understood. We'll figure out the long-term fix, but you've earned yourself a drink. Or whatever it is you guys enjoy." Zyrlo's appendages twitched in what might have been Kyler amusement. "We appreciate your unique approach to problem-solving, Captain." With another round of awkward interspecies pleasantries, the call ended, leaving Draylen and her crew to contemplate their next move. "So," Lorne said, leaning back with a sigh. "What's the plan from here?" Draylen pondered the question, her mind already racing through the possibilities. "We need to get back to Earth and figure out a more permanent solution, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to turn this mess into something resembling profit." Rilla grinned. "I'm sure we can. After all, we've already proven we can sell Ingenuity." "True," Draylen said with a chuckle. "But I'd rather not make a habit of trading dust and prayer." As the Resilient adjusted course, setting a path back to the relative safety of familiar space, Draylen allowed herself a moment of reflection. The universe was an unpredictable, often merciless place, but somehow, against all odds, they were still flying. "Here's to human stupidity," Draylen toasted to no one in particular. "And alien gullibility." The ship hummed with the comforting clatter of impending repairs as the rogue planet, the galactic equivalent of a bad relationship, faded into the background, its shield stable, if only for now. As the Resilient hurtled through the void, Draylen settled into her seat, the weight of the universe slightly lessened, if only for a moment. "Let's see what other messes we can get into before breakfast," she mused, eyes gleaming with the promise of another adventure. And with that, the Resilient soared forward, a duct-taped testament to human perseverance, ready to face whatever cosmic absurdity awaited them next. Captain Draylen scratched at the peeling faux leather of her command chair, the ship's rattle reverberating through her bones. If the Resilient had a soul, it was probably a tired old mechanic scowling behind an unlit cigarette. "And that, ladies and gents," she said, addressing the empty bridge, "is how you wrangle a Kyler into doing your dirty work while holding a straight face." Lorne glanced up from a wiring mess that, if described generously, could be called an electrical panel. "I'm surprised they didn't demand our firstborn. Or maybe they did, and I just wasn't paying attention. Trust me, if they ever saw you, they'd pay us to keep our genes to ourselves," Draylen shot back. "Now, let's see about getting this heap back to Earth before the Kyler's patience or their tech runs out." Rilla's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful as ever in the face of potential disaster. "Captain, I hate to interrupt your philosophical musings, but we've got company." "Company?" Draylen frowned, twisting her chair to squint at the flickering radar screen. "Not the kind that brings cake, I take it. More like the kind that brings flaming debris," Rilla replied, almost cheerfully. "Fantastic," Draylen sighed. "Because nothing says fun like a meteor storm." Sure enough, the radar showed a cluster of red blips hurtling towards them, each one promising an exciting new dent in the Resilient's already pockmarked hull. "Rilla, get us a path through this mess," Draylen commanded, already knowing it was like asking a fish to navigate a desert. "Lorne, how's our shield holding up?" Lorne snorted, not looking up from his nest of cables. "Like a paper umbrella in a monsoon." "Perfect," Draylen muttered, punching a series of commands into her console. "Give me manual control." The ship lurched as Draylen took the helm, the old girl protesting with the grace of a cat in a bath. The approaching meteor swarm filled the viewport, each rock the size of a small car and just as friendly. "Hold tight, folks," Draylen said, her hands firm on the controls. Time for some creative flying. With the ship's controls under her command, Draylen maneuvered the Resilient through the oncoming chaos, weaving between meteors with the reckless precision of a gambler on a lucky streak. The ship groaned with every twist and turn, but it held, barely. "Remind me again why we didn't install that anti-meteor upgrade," Lorne asked, bracing himself against the console. "Because we spent our budget on those fluffy dice for the cockpit," Draylen replied, teeth set in concentration as she avoided another hunk of space rock by a hair's breadth. "Priorities, Lorne, priorities." The Resilient shuddered violently as a meteor glanced off the hull, sending sparks flying through the bridge. Draylen cursed under her breath, struggling to maintain control as warning lights flashed an urgent crimson. "Rilla, status check," Draylen barked, her voice barely rising above the ship's protests. "Damage to the starboard thrusters," Rilla reported, her tone a touch too calm for Draylen's liking. "We're losing speed." "Great," Draylen muttered. "Because we were definitely too fast before." The ship's speed dropped, and the meteors loomed larger, eager to introduce themselves to the Resilient's hull in a much more personal way. "Captain," Lorne warned, his voice tight with nerves masked as irritation. "We need those thrusters back or we're toast." Draylen nodded, fingers dancing over the controls. "Rilla, divert all non-essential power to the thrusters. We need a boost, or we'll be in pieces." Rilla's response was swift, the ship's lights dimming as power was rerouted. The Resilient surged forward, shaky but determined, the thrusters pushing just enough to slip between the incoming rocks. The storm began to thin, the worst of it behind them, though not without leaving its mark. The ship's exterior bore fresh scars, each one a testament to their narrow escape. "Well, that was invigorating," Lorne said dryly, releasing his death grip on the console. Draylen let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Next time, let's plan our vacation somewhere without the death traps." As the Resilient limped out of the meteor storm, the bridge settled into a tense calm, the crew taking stock of their bruised ship and battered nerves. "Okay, let's see what we've got," Draylen said, running diagnostics on the battered systems. "Damage report, people." "Thrusters are shot, but we're still functional," Lorne reported after a moment, wiping sweat from his brow. "Life support's stable, but we've got a few hull breaches. Nothing that'll kill us before lunch." "Good to know starvation is still on the menu," Draylen replied. "Rilla, how are the comms?" "Scrambled but repairable," Rilla said. "I'll get on it as soon as I've finished cleaning the coffee out of the comms unit." Draylen chuckled, shaking her head. "You'd think a ship this size would at least have a functioning cup holder." With the immediate threat past, Draylen allowed herself a moment of reflection, her eyes drifting to the viewport where stars stretched forever. The universe had a way of reminding you how insignificant you were, especially when it tossed a meteor storm in your path. "Captain," Rilla called, breaking the silence. "I've patched up the comms, but the Kyler are getting antsy. They want to discuss the anomalies we sold them." "Of course they do," Draylen sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "All right, put them through." Let's see what fresh hell awaits. The screen flickered to life, revealing Zyrlo's twitching appendages, his expression as inscrutable as ever. Captain Draylen, we have reviewed the data from the Ingenuity you provided and found several inconsistencies. Look, Zyrlo, Draylen said, leaning forward with a disarming grin that was about as genuine as their last cargo manifest. We're operating on a tight schedule here. You got your Ingenuity, we got our tech. Can we call it even? Zyrlo's appendages twitched in what might have been impatience. The discrepancies are concerning and require immediate resolution. Fine, Draylen said, forcing her voice into what she hoped was a conciliatory tone. What do you need from us? We must renegotiate our terms, Zyrlo replied, his tone as clinical as a scalpel. The value of your Ingenuity is now in question. Draylen resisted the urge to roll her eyes. All right, so what are you proposing? Zyrlo hesitated, clearly juggling his own bureaucratic hurdles. In exchange for continued access to our technology, you must provide something of equal value to the original agreement. Something of equal value, huh? Draylen repeated, casting a sidelong glance at Lorne. What about our sparkling personalities? Lorne suggested, earning himself a smirk from Draylen. Those are priceless, Lorne. They'd never go for it, she replied before turning back to Zyrlo. How about we give you exclusive rights to the mineral deposits on that rogue planet? It's a fixer-upper, but it's prime real estate. Zyrlo's appendages fluttered with what might have been surprise. That is acceptable. We will arrange for a delegation to assess the viability of the site. Draylen nodded, biting back a sigh of relief. Glad we could come to an understanding. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a ship to fix. The connection ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Draylen leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the universe settle back into place. Well, that went better than expected, Rilla said, her voice buzzing through the intercom. Now we only have to survive the trip back. Right, Draylen said, rolling her eyes. Just a casual jaunt through the hostile void with our stick-end chewing gum ship, Lorne nodded sagely, and only minor organ damage along the way. Let's get to work, people, Draylen ordered, her tone brisk as she rose from her chair. We've got a ship to patch, a planet to pawn, and a galaxy full of problems to ignore. With that, the crew set to work, each member slipping into the familiar routines of survival. Every clang of metal on metal, every spark from failing circuitry was a reminder of their precarious existence, a testament to human stubbornness against a universe that didn't give a damn. Captain, Rilla called, her voice carrying a note of optimism that was either brave or foolish. Once we make it back, drinks on me. Draylen chuckled, her spirits lifting despite herself. Sure, Rilla. Assuming we make it back with all our limbs attached, I'll take you up on that. The Resilient, bruised but unbroken, sailed onward through the void, a battered beacon of humanity's refusal to go quietly. As Draylen settled back into her seat, her eyes on the stars, she couldn't help but smile. Let's see what other cosmic curveballs the universe has in store, Draylen mused aloud, her voice echoing through the bridge like a challenge. And with that, the Resilient journeyed onward, stubborn, irreverent, and unfazed by the chaos of the cosmos. Captain Draylen found herself back in the captain's chair, although calling it a chair was being generous. It was more like a metal stool with delusions of grandeur, barely surviving under layers of duct tape and wishful thinking. The Resilient was a ship that had seen better days, but then again, so had Draylen and her crew. At least the furniture was consistent. All right, team, Draylen said, staring at the flickering console with the same love-hate relationship one might have with a pet that occasionally bit them. We've got a Kyler economic model to crack, and I'd like to get paid before the universe implodes. Lorne, from his usual spot among the ship's tangled intestines of wires, lifted his head. I thought the universe's collapse was next quarter's problem. Yeah, well, the universe decided to expedite its schedule, Draylen replied, turning her attention to the blinking radar that was less reliable than a toddler's promise. Let's see if we can't return the favor. Rilla's voice buzzed through the intercom, always too chipper, like a morning person in a world where mornings were a myth. "Captain, I've been reviewing Kyler trade laws. Did you know they have a clause for everything, including the proper use of commas in trade agreements?" "Of course they do," Draylen muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. "If there's one thing aliens love, it's bureaucracy." "Remind me again why we're dealing with these pedantic tentacle bearers." "Because they have technology that makes Iors look like it belongs in a museum," Lorne replied, fiddling with a particularly stubborn piece of circuitry. "And because we're gluttons for punishment." "Right," Draylen said. "Rilla, what's our play here?" "Actual ideas, not just sarcastic commentary. It's a long shot, I know." "Well," Rilla replied, ignoring the jab, "we could exploit their loophole regarding non-standard trade goods." Draylen arched an eyebrow. "Non-standard trade goods? Please tell me we're not about to become interstellar junk dealers." "Think of it as entrepreneurial recycling," Rilla said, with a tone that suggested she was smiling. "We offload our broken tech as vintage Earth artifacts." "Brilliant," Draylen said, a grin spreading across her face. "We'll sell them junk and call it culture. It's practically a human tradition." "Just one problem," Lorne said, looking up from his cable nest. "Kyler protocols require trade goods to pass a tech integrity scan." "Our artifacts are going to light up like fireworks." Draylen leaned back, considering. "All right, so we need a workaround for the tech integrity scan, something the Kyler won't spot." "What if we rig a feedback loop?" Lorne suggested, his eyes lighting up with the kind of mad scientist glee usually reserved for cartoon villains. "We can use the ship's existing wiring to spoof the scan results." "That's risky," Rilla chimed in. "If they catch on, we're looking at a diplomatic incident, or worse, they'll make us fill out more forms." Draylen chuckled darkly. "I'd rather face a firing squad than more paperwork, but it's a risk we'll have to take." "Lorne, can you make it happen?" Lorne nodded, his hands already moving to the task with the enthusiasm of a caffeine-addicted squirt. "Give me a couple of Iors and a miracle, and we'll be in business." The bridge buzzed with the sounds of work, each member of the crew falling into their roles like actors in a low-budget play. Draylen watched them with a mix of pride and exasperation, their scrappy determination somehow comforting amidst the cosmic chaos. "Captain," Rilla said, breaking the silence with a tone that suggested she'd found something interesting, "I've been monitoring the Kyler comms. They are dealing with their own crisis, a supply shortage due to a miscalculation in their economic forecasts." Draylen laughed, a sound that was part amusement, part incredulity. "Even the Kyler have to deal with supply chain issues. Maybe we're more alike than I thought. Except their shortages are due to a decimal error, not a meteor storm," Rilla replied dryly. "But it does give us leverage. They'll be more willing to overlook our, creative accounting." "Excellent," Draylen said, rubbing her hands together like a villain with a new plan. "We'll use their desperation to our advantage. If we can get them to buy our junk without questioning the tech scan, we're golden." "Or we're dust," Lorne interjected, not looking up from his work. "Just saying. Gotta keep things balanced." "Optimism, Lorne," Draylen said, feigning a scolding tone. "It's not a dirty word." "Feels dirty," Lorne grumbled, but the edges of his mouth twitched upward. Iors passed, marked by the clang of tools and the occasional curse as Lorne wrestled with the ship's rebellious systems. Draylen paced the bridge, casting frequent glances at the radar screen, half expecting it to start showing ghosts just to mess with her. Finally, Lorne straightened, wiping his hands on his grease-stained jumpsuit. "Okay, Captain, I've rigged a feedback loop. It should trick the Kyler's scan into thinking our artifacts are the real deal." "Should," Draylen echoed, crossing her arms. "That's not exactly the reassurance I was hoping for." "Well," Lorne replied with a shrug, "I could say it'll definitely work, but then I'd be a liar, and I'm saving my fibbing for the poker game." "Fair enough," Draylen said, taking her seat with a sigh. "Rilla, let's set up the trade. Time to see if our gamble pays off." The comms crackled to life, and Draylen found herself face-to-face with Zyre Low once again. The Kyler emissary's appendages twitched in what might have been anticipation, confusion, or just a bad itch. "Captain Draylen," Zyre Low said, his voice smooth and emotionless, "I trust you have resolved the discrepancies in your previous Ingenuity." "Absolutely," Draylen replied, flashing her best used car saleswoman smile. "We're prepared to offer a selection of rare Earth artifacts in exchange for continued access to your technology." Zyre Low paused, regarding her with an expression that suggested he was either calculating or constipated. "Our scans must confirm the integrity of these artifacts." "Of course," Draylen said, waving a hand as if it were all routine. "Feel free to run your diagnostics." The seconds ticked by, each one a potential nail in their coffin as the Kyler scan ran. Draylen held her breath, glancing at Lorne, who gave a nonchalant thumbs up, like a gambler bluffing with a pair of deuces. Finally, Zyre Low's appendages stilled, his voice carrying a hint of surprise. "The artifacts appear to meet our standards." "This is acceptable." Draylen released a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Fantastic. We'll finalize the transaction then." As Zyre Low signed off, Draylen turned to her crew, a broad grin splitting her face. "Well done, team. We've just sold junk to the galaxy's most fastidious accountants." "Score one for human ingenuity," Lorne said, his voice laced with satisfaction. "And our ability to bend rules until they break." "Let's just hope they don't break back," Rilla added, her tone indicating she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. With the deal secured, Draylen relaxed back into her seat, the tension that had settled across her shoulders easing slightly. They'd managed to outsmart the Kyler, at least for now, and the promise of fresh trade meant they'd survive a little longer in this hostile universe. "All right, people," Draylen called, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "Let's get the Resilient back to some semblance of operational before we push our luck any further." The crew dispersed, moving with the well-practiced coordination of a team that had danced this dance 100 times before. Each step, each flick of a switch was a reminder that here, on the fringes of space, survival wasn't just an instinct. It was an art form. "Rilla," Draylen said, turning back to the intercom, "once we're back on track, see about setting up another meeting with Administrator Bartle. I'm sure Earth will want an update on the rogue planet." "Will do, Captain," Rilla replied. "And for what it's worth, I think we might just make it back in one piece." Draylen chuckled, letting herself believe for a moment that optimism wasn't entirely misplaced. "One piece might be pushing it, but I'll take what I can get." As the Resilient continued its journey, battered but ever defiant, Draylen allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd cheated death, bureaucracy, and alien economic models all in a day's work, and somewhere in the vast, indifferent cosmos, that almost felt like a win. "Here's to the next cosmic curveball," she murmured, eyes on the infinite stars beyond. "We'll be right here, ready to duck." And with that, the Resilient powered on, a ship held together by duct tape, sarcasm, and a refusal to quit, a testament to human stubbornness in a universe that refused to play fair. The Resilient groaned like an old man rising from a particularly creaky chair, leaving a trail of dubious parts behind it as it hurtled through the void. Draylen stood on the bridge, her arms crossed, watching the radar with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a particularly tricky mouse. It wasn't the meteor storm that had her worried this time. No, this time it was a message from Administrator Bartle, and as anyone with even a fleeting acquaintance with bureaucracy knew, when they wanted something, it was never good news. "Draylen," Bartle's voice crackled over the comms, each word sounding like it had been dragged through a mile of red tape. "The situation with the rogue planet is deteriorating faster than anticipated. The shield wall is failing quicker than a politician's promise." "Great," Draylen muttered under her breath. "Just what I needed. A planet-sized reminder that everything's going to hell." Lorne, tinkering with something that looked suspiciously important, raised his head. "What's that, Captain?" More bad news from the pencil pushers, Bartle continued, blissfully unaware of Draylen's running commentary. The Kyler have expressed concerns and are threatening to pull out of negotiations. We need them, Draylen. Earth supply lines depend on it. Tell them if they pull out, they can kiss their decimal-pointed trade agreements goodbye. Draylen replied, a sardonic edge to her voice. Or better yet, let's make them fill out a form in triplicate before they go. That should slow them down, Captain. Bartle's voice was strained, which was impressive given he only communicated via static. This is not a joking matter. Draylen shook her head, cutting the comms. Funny, it feels like one. Rilla, perched at her station like a patient owl with a penchant for spreadsheets, threw in her 2 cents. We could try sweetening the deal, offer them more artifacts. We're running low on junk, Rilla, Draylen replied, and I refuse to sell them my coffee maker. Of course not, Captain, Rilla nodded with mock solemnity. That would be a cruelty beyond measure. Draylen sighed, rubbing at a smudge of grease on her sleeve. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the rock's on fire, Lorne grunted, resuming his wrestling match with the ship's innards. Well, if the Kyler back out, at least we'll have fewer bureaucrats to deal with. Silver linings. Right, Draylen said, her tone matching the futility of their predicament. Because what we really need right now is fewer allies. In the dim hum of the bridge, the crew fell into a tense silence. Each member was acutely aware that the Resilient was living up to its name. Barely. And while the thought of outsmarting the Kyler was a bright spot in an otherwise dismal sky, that brightness was rapidly dimming. Draylen turned her attention to the radar, which had the decency to stay clear of any new disasters for the moment. Rilla, can you get me a status update on the rogue planet's shield wall? I need to know just how close we are to watching our livelihoods implode. Rilla nodded, her fingers dancing over her console. I'll get right on it, but if I had to guess, we're about as close as a gnat's wing. Comforting, Draylen replied, her sarcasm as thick as the ship's recycled air. Just the kind of reassuring news I was hoping for. Lorne, ever the ray of bleak sunshine, piped up again. If it makes you feel any better, Captain, the ship's engines are holding up. That's like saying a patient with a broken leg hasn't got a headache, Draylen quipped. Not exactly what I'd put on a recruitment poster. The intercom crackled to life as Rilla reported back. Captain, I've got the data. The shield wall's degrading rapidly, and if we don't stabilize it, we're talking about a chain reaction that'll disrupt every trade route connected to Earth. Chain reactions are for nuclear physicists, Draylen said, not space captains with a penchant for sarcasm. We could try contacting the Kyler again, Rilla suggested. Appeal to their sense of self-preservation. Do they even have one? Lorne asked, his tone making it clear what his opinion was on the matter. Draylen leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer some divine inspiration. It's worth a shot. But if they want something more than our vintage junk, we're going to have to get creative, as if creativity wasn't already their middle name. The Resilient was practically held together by sheer force of will and maybe a little duct tape. The crew was no stranger to improvisation, but even they had limits. All right, Draylen said, making the decision. Let's reach out, see if they're willing to renegotiate. Prepare for maximum grovel, Lorne muttered, returning his attention to his work. We're going to need it. Rilla set to work, her fingers flying over the controls as she established the connection. Moments later, the screen flickered to life with Zyrlo's face, or what passed for it among the Kyler. Draylen wondered, not for the first time, if he had a sense of humor, or if it was buried under layers of protocol. Captain Draylen, Zyrlo began, his tone as flat and unyielding as an iron bar, I trust you have reconsidered your position. Zyrlo, Draylen said, flashing what she hoped was a winning smile. We've been thinking. Perhaps there's a way for both our people to benefit here, again. He paused, his appendages twitching thoughtfully, or maybe they were just twitching. It was hard to tell with the Kyler. I am listening. We understand your concerns about the rogue planet situation, Draylen continued, choosing her words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. But pulling out now would be premature. Zyrlo regarded her with something that might have been skepticism or indigestion. Your artifacts were intriguing but insufficient. We require more compelling incentives. Compelling incentives, Draylen echoed, shooting a glance at Rilla, who shrugged helplessly. We can work with that. How about more cultural exchanges? We've got literature, music, recipes. Recipes? Zyrlo's voice held the faintest note of interest, or maybe it was disbelief. Yes, recipes, Draylen said, catching the opportunity like a lifeline. Humans are renowned for their culinary diversity. You haven't lived until you've tried a good lasagna. Very well, Zyrlo said, after a pause that could have spanned galaxies. We will consider your proposal, but know this, Captain Draylen, time is not on your side. Neither is luck, Draylen muttered as the screen went dark, cutting off the Kyler emissary. All right, team, we've got a temporary reprieve. Let's make it count. As she stood from her chair, Draylen felt the weight of their situation settle back onto her shoulders. The shield wall was failing, the Kyler were as reliable as a weather forecast, and their ship was one loose bolt away from falling apart. But they were still in the game, somehow. Lorne, Draylen called, how's our wiring holding up? Like a toddler's art project, Lorne replied, rolling out from beneath a console. But as long as no one sneezes too hard, we should be okay. Good, Draylen said, because the last thing we need is to lose power when we're trying to sell gourmet Earth cuisine to aliens. Rilla chuckled, a rare outburst from her normally composed demeanor. Could be worse. We could be trying to sell them our music. Hey, I'll have you know we've got some classics, Lorne interjected. Although, given their taste, they'd probably prefer elevator music. Draylen grinned. We'll save that for the next negotiation. Make them really suffer. With the Kyler temporarily pacified, Draylen turned her mind back to the impending disaster on the rogue planet. If the shield wall collapsed, the fallout would be catastrophic, not just for Earth's trade routes but for the whole sector. Rilla, Draylen said, getting serious for a moment, let's make sure Bartle's keeping up his end of the bargain. I need to know every move Earth makes on this shield wall issue. We can't afford to be caught off guard. Rilla nodded, her earlier levity replaced by her usual efficiency. I'll stay on it, Captain. As the crew went about their tasks, the sense of impending doom hung in the air like a particularly stubborn fog. But they were used to that. After all, space was nothing if not a series of looming catastrophes, each one more creatively devastating than the last. Draylen allowed herself a moment of quiet contemplation, staring out into the vast emptiness beyond the hull. It was a sobering thought that they were just a speck in the grand design, a tiny cog in a universe that kept spinning no matter how many disasters were thrown their way. But for now, at least, they had a plan. As shaky and improbable as it might be, it was still a plan. And in a universe that seemed hell-bent on tearing them apart, that was something. Maybe not much, but something. All right, folks, Draylen called, breaking the silence with a determined nod. Let's get this show back on the road. We've got a planet to save, and I'm not about to let a bit of cosmic bureaucracy stand in our way. With that, the crew of the Resilient got back to work, their collective resolve as fragile and unyielding as the ship they called home. They were up against a universe that rarely played fair, but if there was one thing Draylen and her crew had learned, it was that sometimes the best victories came from the unlikeliest places. And as the Resilient powered on, rattling and defiant, it served as a reminder that out here, on the edges of known space, survival wasn't just a matter of chance. It was an art, and they were damn well going to master it. Draylen paced the cramped bridge of the Resilient, her boots thudding rhythmically on the battered metal floor. The universe might be falling apart around them, but the ship's rhythmic creaks and groans were somewhat comforting, like an old roommate who snores but pays the rent on time. Lorne was hunched over a console, his face illuminated by the flickering lights of the control panel. Still no word from Administrator Bartle, Draylen asked, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Rilla shook her head, her eyes glued to her own screen. Nothing but radio silence, Captain. Maybe he's busy rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic of bureaucracy. Or he's just pretending we don't exist, which is a skill many have perfected, Draylen muttered, rubbing the back of her neck. All right, we need something to convince the Kyler that pulling out of the deal would be like shooting themselves in their metaphorical feet. Lorne looked up, an eyebrow raised. Metaphorical feet? Do they even have feet? Figure of speech, Draylen replied, waving her hand dismissively. Point is, we need something they can't resist, something that screams we're better together. Rilla rolled her eyes. Can't we just send them a fruit basket and be done with it? Sure, if we want to start an interstellar war with the Galactic Council on gift-giving, Draylen said. No, we need something that shows them just how resourceful we can be. Like what? Lorne asked. We've already offered them everything short of my grandmother's recipe for potato soup. Draylen paused, an idea forming like storm clouds on the horizon. What if we offer them an alliance based on intangible assets? Intangible assets, Rilla echoed, clearly unimpressed. Sounds like corporate speak for we've got nothing. Exactly, Draylen said, her eyes alight with the kind of crazy confidence that was either a stroke of genius or a prelude to disaster. Let's talk about our resilience, our creativity. Humans have a knack for surviving the impossible. We've got stories, culture, a survival instinct that's practically legendary. Lorne scratched his head skeptically. So we're gonna trade them. Hope and dreams. Not just hope and dreams, Draylen corrected. Hope and dreams that come with a side of sheer bloody-mindedness. Think about it. The Kyler are logical to a fault. We offer them something they can't quantify, something they can't replicate. Rilla considered this, a slow smile spreading across her face. You might be onto something, Captain. We sell them the concept that when the chips are down, there's nothing like a human with their back against the wall. Exactly, Draylen said, clapping her hands together. Besides, who else is going to introduce them to the joy of lasagna? Lorne chuckled, shaking his head. All right, I'm in. But how do we package human resilience? Do we slap a bow on it and call it a day? That's where the sales pitch comes in, Draylen said, with the enthusiasm of someone who's just figured out the punchline to a joke. We need to show them exactly why they need us, and that means a little creative exposition. Rilla nodded, already starting to type. I'll put together a proposal. Something that highlights our knack for surviving when we really shouldn't. Make it snappy, Draylen instructed, her mind already racing ahead to the next hurdle. We need to get this to Zyre Low before he decides pulling out is easier than sticking around. As Rilla busied herself with the proposal, Draylen turned back to Lorne. How's the ship holding up under all this stress? Well, it's not falling apart yet, Lorne replied, tapping a gauge that seemed determined to remain in the red. But I'd suggest no one breathes too hard. The last thing we need is a hull breach because someone sneezed. Noted, Draylen said dryly. We'll try to keep the allergies to a minimum. A sudden chime interrupted them, signaling an inbound communication. Rilla glanced up, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. It's Administrator Bartle, finally decided to grace us with his presence. About time, Draylen grumbled, before gesturing for Rilla to put the message through. The screen flickered, revealing Administrator Bartle's perpetually tired face. He looked like a man who'd spent one too many nights with a spreadsheet and not enough with a pillow. Captain Draylen, Bartle began, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 bureaucratic decisions. I apologize for the delay. The current situation on Earth is challenging. Challenging as in end-of-the-world challenging or just mildly inconvenient challenging, Draylen asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Somewhere in between, I suspect, Bartle replied with a resigned sigh. The shield wall's degradation is accelerating, and we are coordinating efforts to stabilize it. Draylen leaned forward. Coordinating doesn't sound like fixing. We need a real solution, Bartle, preferably before the planet decides to turn itself inside out. We're doing what we can, Bartle said, sounding like a man who'd rather be anywhere but on this call. I trust you are handling the negotiations with the Kyler, like a master chef with a pot of boiling water, Draylen replied. We've got a new angle we're working on. Just need to make sure Earth can hold up its end of the bargain. Bartle nodded, his face creasing into what might generously be called a smile. Understood. I'll keep you updated on any developments here. Appreciate it, Draylen said, her tone softening slightly. And Bartle, try not to drown in paperwork. The screen blinked off, leaving the bridge in relative darkness once more. Lorne snorted, rolling his eyes. I bet my last credit that Bartle's desk is 1 comma away from becoming sentient. Probably, Draylen agreed. But at least he's not actively getting in our way. Rilla finished typing, turning to face the captain. Proposal's ready. It's a bit rough around the edges, but it captures the essence of what we're trying to sell. Good work, Draylen said, taking the data pad. Let's hope it's enough to convince Zyrlo that humans are worth the trouble. With a deep breath, Draylen initiated the transmission to the Kyler emissary. The wait that followed felt interminable, each second stretching like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, the screen flickered to life once again, and Zyrlo's unflinching visage appeared. Captain Draylen, Zyrlo intoned, his voice as monotone as ever. I trust you have a revised offer. Draylen nodded, doing her best to exude confidence. Indeed, Zyrlo. We've reconsidered our position and propose an exchange that emphasizes our unique human traits. Elaborate, Zyrlo said, though his expression didn't change. We're offering an alliance based on our intangible qualities, Draylen explained, gesturing expansively. Our resilience, creativity, and adaptability. Humans are experts at turning the tides of fate, even when all seems lost. Zyrlo's appendages twitched slightly, a gesture Draylen had come to interpret as intrigue. You are offering human characteristics as a commodity. Precisely, Draylen said, leaning forward. We might lack the technological sophistication of the Kyler, but we more than make up for it with ingenuity and determination. When faced with impossible odds, we find a way. And you believe these traits are transferable to an interspecies alliance? Zyrlo asked, his skepticism apparent. I do, Draylen replied. Picture this, Kyler logic and human tenacity working in tandem. We could tackle the rogue planet situation together, finding solutions that neither species could achieve alone. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of the moment pressing down on the Resilience bridge. Draylen held her breath, waiting for Zyrlo's response. Finally, the Kyler emissary spoke. This is an unorthodox proposition, Captain Draylen. But there is merit in exploring the potential of such an alliance. Draylen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. So you'll consider it. Zyrlo's appendages quivered, a subtle acknowledgement. I will present your proposal to the council. However, understand that time is of the essence. Trust me, Draylen replied, her voice steady. Nobody understands that better than us. The screen went dark once more and the bridge erupted into a collective exhale. They'd done it, or at least they'd bought themselves a little more time. Rilla grinned, though her eyes were still shadowed by worry. Well, that was something. Something's better than nothing, Lorne said, standing and stretching. Now let's just hope the Kyler Council sees the value in our brand of stubbornness. Draylen smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders, even if only temporarily. We've given them a reason to stay. Now it's up to us to prove that we're worth the gamble. And if they say no, Rilla asked, her voice tinged with an edge of anxiety. Then we do what we always do, Draylen replied, her resolve firm. We adapt, improvise, and survive. It's the human way. The crew nodded, each member steeling themselves for the challenges ahead. They were on the precipice of something monumental, and while the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, they knew they weren't facing it alone. As Draylen turned her gaze back to the stars, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, however fragile. In the vast expanse of space, against the backdrop of impending doom, they'd carved out a small victory. And for now, that was enough. All right, let's get back to work, Draylen called, her voice carrying the authority of a captain who refused to be beaten. "We've got a planet to save and a universe to remind that humans aren't so easily written off." With renewed determination, the crew of the Resilient returned to their duties, their fate intertwined with the whims of the cosmos and the resilience of the human spirit. They were battered, bruised, and maybe a little bit crazy, but they were still in the fight. And sometimes, that was all it took to change everything. The Resilient chugged through the vast, uncaring cosmos, the sound of its engines more like a smoker's cough than a roar. Draylen sat back in her chair, the faux leather more duct-tape than material, and let out a sigh that felt as old as the ship itself. She glanced at Lorne, who was engaged in a battle of wills with his console flickering lights painting his face like a cheap disco ball. "How's the ship holding up, Lorne?" she asked, not entirely sure she wanted the answer. "Like a house of cards in a wind tunnel," Lorne replied, tapping a gauge that wavered like a drunk on a tightrope. "We're one sneeze away from the vacuum of space giving us a makeover." "Charming," Draylen muttered. "Just make sure our illustrious guests don't sniff too hard." Rilla, eyes glued to her screen, snorted. "If the Kyler have a sense of smell, we're screwed either way. This ship probably smells like a dead skunk wrapped in a rotten burrito. No offense." "None taken," Draylen said dryly. "We're not here for a 5-star review anyway. Just need to keep them interested long enough to sign on the dotted line." As if summoned by their precarious discussions, the comms unit crackled to life, the voice of Zyrlo cutting through with all the warmth of a glacier. "Captain Draylen," the Kyler emissary intoned. "The Council has reviewed your proposal." Draylen straightened, throwing a glance at Rilla and Lorne, who both leaned in, expressions somewhere between hope and the grim expectation of impending doom. "And," Draylen prompted, keeping her tone casual enough to suggest she wasn't, in fact, on the edge of her seat. "The concept of trading in human resilience is intriguing," Zyrlo continued. "We are willing to proceed with a tentative alliance, contingent on immediate results." Draylen felt the tension ease out of her shoulders, replaced by the familiar itch of the next problem to solve. "Immediate results, huh? Well, who doesn't love a good challenge?" "Indeed," Zyrlo replied, his voice as flat as a pond on a windless day. "Preparations are being made to stabilize the shield wall using Kyler technology. Your presence is required at the southern quadrant of the rogue planet to oversee operations." "Roger that," Draylen said, turning to her crew with a nod. "We'll be there. Hopefully, this old bucket of bolts can make it without spontaneously disassembling. I trust you will ensure your craft remains intact," Zyrlo said, managing to convey skepticism without inflection. "Time is of the essence." "Isn't it always?" Draylen replied, forcing a smile. "See you on the ground, Zyrlo." The connection ended, leaving the bridge in silence save for the ever-present hum of the ship's life support, a melody that, while monotonous, was preferable to the silence of space. "Well," Rilla said, breaking the quiet with a wry grin, "looks like we've convinced them that humans are more useful than a chocolate teapot after all." "Let's not start patting each other on the back just yet," Draylen cautioned, though she couldn't help but let a hint of pride seep into her voice. "We've got a rogue planet to babysit, and I don't plan on adding planetary extinction to my list of failures." Lorne snorted, pushing back from his console. "I dunno, sounds like a headline. Captain Draylen, Destroyer of Worlds, has a nice ring to it." "Maybe for my memoir," Draylen shot back, standing and stretching. "But for now, let's focus on making sure we all live long enough to regret it." The Resilient groaned in protest as they set a course for the southern quadrant, the ship's systems flickering like they had a personal vendetta against stability. Rilla and Lorne worked together to coax the ship's engines into cooperation, their banter punctuated by the occasional thump of something important sounding. "Remind me to never trust a ship that has more personality than its crew," Rilla muttered, fingers flying over her console as she rerouted power. "Hey, we've been through worse," Lorne replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Remember that time with the space slugs?" Draylin rolled her eyes, settling into her chair with a resigned sigh. I'd rather not, thank you very much. Let's just get to the damn planet before the universe decides to throw another curveball our way. The journey was mercifully uneventful, the Resilient managing to avoid any major malfunctions through what could only be described as sheer spite. As they approached the rogue planet, the view from the bridge was dominated by the failing shield wall, its translucent energy barrier flickering like a dying light bulb. Looks like someone forgot to pay their power bill, Rilla quipped, eyes glued to the screen as they descended toward the designated coordinates. Let's hope the Kyler have brought enough extension cords, Lorne added, checking the readouts with a frown. Because this shield wall's about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Draylin nodded, her focus shifting to the task at hand. Time to see if our new friends can work their magic. They landed with all the grace of a drunk rhino, the Resilient shuddering as it settled on the planet's surface. Draylin led the way out, the oppressive atmosphere of the rogue planet pressing in from all sides. The Kyler awaited them, their forms shimmering under the dim light, Zyrlo standing at the forefront like a particularly stern school principal. Captain Draylin, Zyrlo greeted, his appendages weaving a greeting that Draylin had come to assume was polite. We are prepared to initiate stabilization procedures. Sounds like a plan, Draylin replied, gesturing for Lorne and Rilla to join her. Just tell us where you need us, and we'll do our best not to screw it up. Zyrlo's appendages twitched in what Draylin hoped was amusement. Your presence is required to oversee the integration of our technology with yours. This process is delicate, Draylin echoed, glancing back at her crew with a grin. Just how we like it. The process began with a flurry of activity, the Kyler's sleek technology interfacing with the Resilient systems like an alien symphony. Draylin watched as the shield wall's energy patterns shifted, the flickering chaos gradually giving way to a steady, reliable pulse. Well, I'll be damned, Lorne muttered, eyes wide as he watched the transformation. It's actually working. Of course it is, Rilla replied with a smirk. Combine their alien wizardry with our stubbornness, and anything's possible. Draylin stood back, the weight of the moment settling over her like a warm blanket. They'd done it. Against all odds, against the sheer idiocy of the universe, they'd managed to stabilize the rogue planet. The shield wall now shimmered with a Resilient energy, a testament to the unlikely alliance between human grit and Kyler ingenuity. Congratulations, Captain Draylin, Zyrlo said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. The Council will be pleased with these results. Glad to hear it, Draylin replied, unable to hide her grin. Guess we're not so useless after all. Indeed, Zyrlo agreed, his appendages weaving a pattern Draylin recognized as approval. Our alliance has proven beneficial. We shall continue to collaborate provided your efforts remain consistent. Don't worry, Draylin assured him. Consistency is our middle name, right next to problematic. With the stabilization complete, the crew of the Resilient returned to their ship, their spirits high despite the lingering scent of burnt wiring and questionable decisions. Draylin settled into her chair, the familiar creaks and groans of the ship a comforting reminder that they'd survived yet another day. Well, that was a ride, Rilla said, her voice tinged with exhaustion and triumph. I think we might finally be getting the hang of this whole not dying thing. Speak for yourself, Lorne replied, though his grin betrayed his relief. I'm still convinced we're one bad decision away from becoming space debris. We've always been one bad decision away, Draylin said, leaning back with a contented sigh. But that's what makes it fun. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars drift by as the Resilient set course for its next destination. The universe was still a chaotic mess, full of pitfalls and peril, but for the moment they'd carved out a small victory, a testament to human adaptability and sheer bloody-mindedness. All right, team, Draylin called, breaking the silence with a note of authority that couldn't quite hide her pride. Let's get back to work. We've got a universe to save and a reputation to uphold. With renewed determination, the crew of the Resilient returned to their duties, their fate intertwined with the whims of the cosmos and the resilience of the human spirit. They were battered, bruised, and maybe a little bit crazy, but they were still in the fight. And sometimes, that was all it took to change everything. As the Resilient hurtled through the void towards Earth, the atmosphere on the bridge was thick with the sort of tension that only comes from knowing you've just opened Pandora's box and are now stuck with whatever's flown out. For the crew of the Resilient, that meant a tentative alliance with the Kyler and a rogue planet no longer teetering on the edge of cosmic catastrophe. At least, not teetering quite as dangerously as it had been. "Well, looks like we live to regret another day," Draylen said, spinning her chair around to face her crew, her expression a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits with a ship held together by hope and duct tape." "Hope's overrated," Lorne grumbled, eyes fixed on the flickering control panel. "I'll stick with duct tape, thanks." "It hasn't let me down yet. Or at least not all at once," Rilla added, her fingers dancing over her console. "You know, I think I'm starting to enjoy these little death-defying escapades of yours. They're like extreme sports, only instead of a broken bone, it's the entire universe that's liable to snap." Draylen smiled, the weariness of leadership momentarily eclipsed by camaraderie. "That's the spirit. And hey, if this captain thing doesn't work out, there's always a career in motivational speaking. Welcome to the end of the universe. We hope you enjoy your stay." The stars streaked past the viewport, a reminder of the vast, indifferent expanse they called home. It was as comforting as it was terrifying, an endless sea of nothing that somehow managed to be everything all at once. If the universe had a heart, it was probably as warm and fuzzy as Administrator Bartle's enthusiasm for new ideas. "Speaking of our illustrious administrator," Lorne piped up, "what do you think the odds are he'll actually appreciate what we've done here? I mean, we technically saved the supply chain, right?" Draylen snorted. "Appreciate it. That guy still thinks gratitude is the name of a planet. But maybe he'll throw us a bone, might even upgrade our ship from deathtrap to minor inconvenience." "Ooh, I like the sound of that," Rilla said, feigning enthusiasm. Next stop, bureaucratic status quo. As they approached Earth, the planet loomed large and familiar, its blue and green visage a comforting sight against the black canvas of space. Sure, it was a hot mess of overpopulation and political chaos, but it was their hot mess. "Home sweet home," Draylen murmured, settling back into her seat with a sigh. "Let's just hope the landing is smoother than our last attempt. My spine's still recovering from that one." "Speaking of recovery," Lorne remarked, "you think the Kyler tech is actually gonna hold?" "I mean the shield wall's stable now, but how long's that gonna last? Until the next cosmic sneeze," Draylen shrugged. "No clue, but that's a problem for future us. Present us has earned a break, maybe even a drink if we're lucky. Or several," Rilla suggested with a grin. "I'm thinking something strong enough to make us forget we ever thought space slugs were a good idea." The Resilient entered Earth's atmosphere with a rumble that suggested the ship was less than thrilled with the whole concept of gravity. On the ground, they were met with the usual fanfare reserved for returning heroes who were equal parts essential and expendable. None whatsoever. They touched down at the spaceport, the ship wheezing to a halt like an asthmatic old dog that had finally caught up to its tail. Draylen led the way down the ramp, the crew following with the practiced ease of people who knew that as soon as they hit the ground, the real work began. "Welcome back, Captain Draylen," a voice drawled from the entrance to the hangar. Administrator Bartle stood there, his expression as non-committal as ever. "I trust your mission was successful." "Oh, you know," Draylen replied, affecting a breezy tone. "We only saved a planet, brokered an alliance with a species that thinks trade agreement is synonymous with hostage situation, and avoided dying in the process. All in a day's work." Bartle's eyebrows rose an imperceptible fraction. "Quite. The Council will be interested to hear your report. I assume it will be comprehensive." "As comprehensive as a report can be without descending into fiction," Draylen assured him. By the way, any chance we can get some upgrades on this rust bucket? We did make it back alive, after all." Bartle glanced at the Resilient, his expression one of mild distaste. "I'll see what I can do," which translates to "don't hold your breath," Lorne muttered under his breath, earning a snort from Rilla. Bartle turned to leave, the conversation apparently concluded. "Good day, Captain. I look forward to your report." As he walked away, Rilla rolled her eyes. "I swear that man's more robotic than half the tech we've got on board." "Maybe he's part Kyler," Lorne suggested. "Would explain the personality." Draylen laughed, shaking her head. "Come on, let's get out of here before someone decides we look too happy and tries to fix it." They made their way to a nearby bar, the kind of place that advertised itself as quaint, but actually just hadn't updated its decor since the last Galactic War. It was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and regret. "Ah, the smell of home," Rilla quipped, sliding into a booth with the sort of practiced ease that suggested she spent more time here than she'd like to admit. Lorne ordered drinks, returning with a tray of dubious-looking concoctions. "Cheers to not being dead," he said, raising his glass. They clinked their glasses with the solemnity of people who just narrowly avoided becoming statistics in an interstellar obituary. The first sip burned like a betrayal, but the second went down easier, the alcohol doing its job of dulling the edges of reality. "You know," Rilla said after a moment, "for all the crap we've dealt with, I wouldn't trade this for anything. Not even a fully functional ship." "Speak for yourself," Lorne replied with a grin. "I'd trade this for a ship that doesn't sound like it's crying every time we hit a bump." "But then where would be the fun in that?" Draylen asked, leaning back with a contented sigh. "A little chaos keeps us sharp. Besides, we've made it this far. What's a little more madness in the grand scheme of things?" "Fair point," Rilla agreed. "And who knows? Maybe our luck will hold out just long enough for us to pull off another miracle." "Hope so," Lorne said, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Because I'm not sure the universe can take another one of our solutions." They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from shared experiences and the knowledge that, despite everything, they were still here, still fighting, still enduring. As the night wore on, the conversation drifted from the serious to the absurd, the way it often does when people who've seen too much find themselves with too little to lose. They talked about everything and nothing, their words weaving a tapestry of irreverence and resilience. Eventually, the bar began to empty, patrons leaving one by one until only the Resilience crew was left. Draylen looked around, taking in the quiet, the sense of peace that comes from knowing you've done your part, at least for today. "You know," she said, her voice soft in the stillness, "for all the insanity, I think we're doing okay. The universe might be falling apart, but we're still here, still fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that means something. Means we're too stubborn to know when to quit," Lorne replied, but there was no bite to his words, only the quiet acknowledgement of a shared truth. "Or maybe it means we're just crazy enough to think we can make a difference," Rilla added, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and cynicism. Draylen smiled, raising her glass one last time. "To madness, then. And to whatever comes next." They drank to that, toasting the unknown with the reckless abandon of those who've seen the worst and still choose to believe in something better. As they left the bar, the Resilient waiting like a faithful old dog ready for its next adventure, they knew the future was uncertain. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to face whatever insanity the universe had in store. Together they walked into the night, their laughter echoing in the stillness, a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. For in a universe that seemed determined to break them, they were still standing, battered, bruised, but unbowed. And sometimes that was all it took to change everything.